Welcome back to Morning Express. It is now 13 minutes after 7. This is State of the Nation. And of course, what we're looking at the State of the Nation today is the soaring cost of living in Kenya. It's become unbearable. And we do know that the president is on record saying that, well, one of the things that Parliament will do when they resume, which they already have done, resuming, is to bring down the prices of food commodities at the till. That has not happened so far. We also do know that during the budget, the president had also promised that there are measures that are in place that would ensure that the Kenyan mwananchi basically pays less at the till. That has not happened. So we'd like to find out what might be the problem and how we can move ahead from that. And I'll reintroduce the panel that we have here this morning. And to my extreme left, we're now joined by Senator Moses Kajwang, Senator for... I forget the place now. It slips my mind.
Outgoing and incoming Homa Bay.
Outgoing and incoming. Confident right there. Congratulations on the nominations, by the way. And welcome to the set. The rest of you, I'd already introduced you. But now, going to the subject at hand, Moses Kajwang, I'd like you to weigh in on this and let us know what your thoughts are, why we are where we are as a country.
Thank you, Mike. First of all, I think the president is clueless and his entire administration is out of its depth by thinking that recalling Parliament would be a solution to the food crisis we have in this country. I have listened to the other panelists argue, and Prof says we don't have a food crisis. Obviously, to my brothers and sisters in Kibra and in Madare, there is a food crisis because the price of unga is extremely high. It's beyond their reach. But it is caused by a leadership problem. It is caused by a leadership crisis. What we forget is that Article 43 of the Kenyan Constitution provides or guarantees the right of every Kenyan to food, the right to, nutrition, the right or the freedom from hunger. That is a constitutional provision. And Mike, I can tell you, because sometimes we can complain and not give solutions. The Senate has passed a bill called the Food Security Bill, which has been sitting in the National Assembly for the last 2 years, which is supposed to give effect to Article 43 of the Kenyan Constitution. So what we have is a leadership problem, a leadership crisis that has given rise to what we are currently seeing as, a food crisis. There are a lot of people who've been saying that there's been drought in the country. Yes, there's been drought in the country. And I've traveled the country as a member of Senate just to assess the impact of drought and what it is leading to in terms of conflict between communities. But there's a difference between drought and famine. Drought is natural, but a famine is man-made. It is something that can be mitigated. And again, poor leadership. An administration that has been entrusted by the people of Kenya to ensure that the Constitution is provided and the basic rights spelled out in the Constitution are guaranteed to every Kenyan has failed in its task. And that is why today, when people are complaining about rising food prices, when people are complaining about the absence of basic commodities in supermarkets and in the markets, they say that it is a natural phenomenon. They attribute it, they say it's an act of God. They say it is because of drought. But there's a difference between drought and famine.
I see Prof shaking his head there. Are you shaking your head in disagreement or in agreement?
In agreement that and we touched on it when you talked about an act of God. And I said, let nobody blame God on anything. God has given us all the resources that we need to solve our problems. The challenge that we have is that we do not have a leadership that is visionary. We do not have a leadership that cares. But more importantly, Michael, I just wish that our problem was a leadership that didn't care. I just wish that our problem was a leadership that didn't have vision. If we just stopped at that, maybe we could still survive. Our problem is a leadership that is predatory. It is a leadership that is thieving and looting and stealing from the people. If they were just inept and clueless and rudderless and they were just there, then that is fine. But when they go as low as causing this kind of a crisis, because like I have told you, food is a multi-billion shillings business. I don't actually think that, apart from one or two other areas, that there is any business in this country or in any country that is bigger than food.
Because people must eat.
Because people must eat. And unfortunately, we have a regime, and we have had a regime over the last 54 years that has had huge, huge interests in business in this country, okay? And part of that business, or the huge part of that business, is food. Rice, maize, milk, sugar. These are areas that continuously are in a crisis mode. Why? Because the political class are interested players in those sectors.
All right, let me come to you, Mr. Waweru. You're the chair of Third Way Alliance. What solutions do you think are on the table? Third Way Alliance is having a presidential candidate, Kuro Court, and, well, what are the solutions that you have for this country?
On the front of food security, we think that we should have, we should promote, one, accountability on all sectors in the country, because one of our problems that is eating into the food, bringing in this food crisis is corruption. It is actually, this is a corruption-related problem, because the leadership, as a professor says here, is the leadership of Kenya is predatory. 54 years ago, if you look around, and the net worth of most of the people who have served in government is far much higher than most of the people who run governments, even in the US. So as Third Way Alliance, one of our pillars is to end theft of public funds. We actually don't talk about corruption in Third Way, because it is actually stealing. These people have been stealing. They got a funny name called corruption to cover up for what they do. The stealing is what has brought in all these issues of food crisis. So if you deal with corruption, food crisis will also be dealt with. You also go to our next pillar, economic
and how will
social
Third Way
injustice.
Alliance deal with stealing, now that it's not corruption, according to you? How are you going to deal with stealing?
Let me first of all bring you up to speed with what we think. To solve the stealing problem in Kenya, we must go back and look back and know, how did Kenya become a stealing nation? How did our leaders start stealing from us? The problem started in 1963. The leaders stole land from the people who fought for independence. And it was sanitized. It was thought it is okay. Government officials at senior levels, like PSs, were given land for free, which was called Z-plots. People don't talk about it because they fear. There's a lot of fear. That is why we don't solve our problems, because we see these people as deities. So all along, even when Moi became president in 1978, some of us were in primary school, like in Stari 2. He stayed, tafuata nyayo za mzee. He went on with the plunder. Now, square, we have like 3 individuals in this country who own about 1 million acres. 1 million acres. That inequality.
You're still highlighting the problem.
I
want us to get to the solution, because Third Way Alliance
I want to
is
bring you
saying
to speed.
that they are offering a solution.
That is part of the solution, because part of the solution is to remove all this leadership. All people who are related to the independence leadership should be forgeared. We will remove them from leadership, and that is part of the solution.
And by that, you're talking about Jubilee, NASA leadership.
Yes.
Okay.
We must remove these people from leadership to get solutions for this country. Because if we keep on re-electing and recycling the same scions of these thugs, this country will never see food security. They will never be, will never end corruption, because they will always protect each other. Let me tell you, the first crisis which I know of corruption in this country, which actually is part of this food problem, is the Kenyan Fertilizer Company, which was, the scandal was in 1975, when I was 4 years old. We are still, even in the last year's budget, we are still paying that loan. The factory was never built. Who was responsible? Many Kenyans now, the young Kenyans who are going to vote this year, who have been born in 80s and 90s, they don't know of the Kenyan fertilizer company. They don't know who stole this money. Most of us, the adults, are refusing to confront these people and tell them, why are we paying for a loan for a fertilizer company that was never built?
Let me bring
so
in...
the solution is, one, it is a leadership problem. Because if you go on re-electing thieves, you will never, ever, ever get a solution to this problem. So one of the solutions, electing new leaders. Kenya has no shortage of people. 44 million people, you can never have a shortage of leaders. So number two, then you implement the solutions. Technology in agriculture, adopt local, adaptable technology that will work here, ensure open accountability. Like now, who is telling us what happened at National Cereals and Produce Board? It is not, why would we wake up one day with shortage?
Okay, allow me to pause you there and just bring in Honorable Moses Kajwang here. And first of all, maybe your response to his solution, first of all, getting rid of all the leaders. We seem to be recycling the same leaders from time immemorial.
Well, Mike, they are very airy ideas. Assuming there have been 100 million people who have lived on this land called Kenya since 1900. Right now, we've got a 40 million population. You know, we've got natural attrition. And so from 1900, probably we had 100 million, Professor can confirm. The people who have been in political leadership, this is the 11th parliament that we have, do not exceed 3,000. And I don't think that the 3,000 could be the cause of the problems afflicting the 100 million people that have been around for the last 100 years. Let me get to the point. There's this obsession with politicians. There's this obsession with politics that it is the 3,000 politicians that have been a problem, and that when you replace them, you are going to have solutions to the problems of this country. First of all, 70% of elected leaders are not re-elected. Right now, you're having nominations. You can see big names are falling by the wayside. And so there's always been that natural transition. And so Third Way Alliance should rest comfortably that Kenyans know how to get new leadership in office. But let us get to the main point. I think let's get to the main point. Because, you know, guys are moving away from the issue of agriculture. Number one, the Maputo Accord requires African states and signatories to the Maputo Accord, including Kenya, to invest at least 10% of its budget in agriculture. Kenya has not done so. A leadership and a government that is committed to agriculture and food security must commit at least 10% of its budget to agriculture. We have questioned the national government, the Jubilee government, to find out what percentage of its budget goes into agriculture, and it falls way below 10%. And the argument has been that agriculture has been devolved. But if you take the investment of the national government and the investment of the county governments, it is still below 10%. And so a NASA government will give effect to the Maputo Accord. Number two, we must look at issues of input. He has talked about Kenren, and Kenren is about fertilizer. Let us look at the way fertilizer is being distributed in this country and things like seed. A NASA government will ensure that seed and fertilizer is distributed at the level of subsidiarity, and in this case, it would be the polling station level. Right now, a farmer from Oyugis in Homa Bay County will have to go to Kericho County to get fertilizer and to get subsidized seed. The cost of transport will make nonsense of that subsidy. So we have to look at the input. We also have to look at issues of infrastructure. A lot of food goes to waste because of poor infrastructure. One of the things we have said as a NASA government is that we must kill this thing called Kenya Rural Roads Authority. That is a body that is given the mandate to build roads, the last mile infrastructure for agriculture. We kill Kenya Rural Roads Authority and give more money to the county governments so that they can have money to build roads so that the dairy farmer, the poultry farmer, and the fish farmer can get a road so that his produce goes to market quickly. Then we also have to ask ourselves, how do we ensure that between harvest and 60 days to the next harvest, Kenyans have food? We must ensure we give effect to warehouse receipts in this country. So I'm giving you very, very specific issues that we as NASA, we are going to ensure we put in place.
I'll come back to you.
It's not about change of leadership. We must give specific solutions
to the problems.
To the
and those are
sector.
solutions possibly that have been given before. So my question to you, when I come back to you, I want to come to Mr. Obiro, but when I come back to you is the question of now that NASA has the same leaders that we had for the last God knows how long, how is it going to be done differently that they've not done before? But let me hear from you, Mr. Obiro, first.
I like the other panelists. All of them have a political angle and a political interest in it. Let's look at the problem and look at it soberly. The prices of food, the basic food commodities in this country, did not rise just yesterday. If you look at the data, look at the statistical abstract of 2016, look at the price of the maize grains, 1 kilogram of maize. It started rising from 2008, and it has been consistently rising up to today. It was at 25, and it has now come up to 51 point something Kenyan shillings. Now, we can't say that this is a problem which, and that period has traversed various governments. It has not been one government. We've had various governments and various political leaders. But we have a problem, and as us, we mentioned it and said, the problem we have in Kenya is that our productivity is low, and our mindset. We've not sat down and said, okay, what are we investing in agriculture? We are investing, say, 200 billion.
Who is responsible for that productivity? Who is it that takes care of that productivity? Is it the Mwananchi?
All of us. All of us, we are responsible.
So what you're saying is that the problem is for all of us?
There has to be a mindset change, starting from the top leadership up to the common Mwananchi. We can't be a people who shift problem and say, if I don't have food in my household, then that is the president's problem. If the president doesn't do something, we tend to be shifting problems.
Isn't that the role of leadership and government? To ensure that they regulate and ensure that we have an environment where we can produce and that the common Mwananchi has at least bare minimum taken care of.
Now, if let me put it this way. Our agricultural system in this country, most of the people we have in this country do subsistence farming, small landhold farming in their rural places, in their small farms. Now, these are the people who need to be empowered to be able to produce a lot in that farm. That means we need to give them services like extension services, advise them on the right type of seed, what they should plant at what season. But at the same time, let's see, which is the other problem we have. When we have a bumper harvest, the prices of the commodities go down, and that becomes a discouragement to the farmers. What we are not doing, and what we need to see, like if the politicians should be looking at, is how then do we empower the private sector so that the innovations they have, they can be able to set factories that add value to the commodities we have. And this is going to drive the prices of this commodity and become a motivation for farmers to do the farming. That's one. Now, the problem we have at hand today, there are two angles to it. We can look at the long-term solutions, but then we have also the immediate solutions we need to look at. The people of Kenya who are today buying, say, maize at 130 shillings or for 2 kilogram, or the 2 kilogram packet at 180, they're not going to wait for 10 years down the line to get resolved. We are saying the immediate solution, and this we even told government, and we are telling politicians, is first we need to work on. We have a problem, we have a solution. I don't agree with the professor when he says we don't have a crisis. We have a crisis. People are paying a lot in terms of food. We can't sit here and start apportioning blame. What we are saying, let's allow importation of the basic food commodities to address the situation
at hand now. What Professor was saying earlier on, the same people who are coming up with these policies are the same people who are importing. But anyway,
listen. Let's see it this way. I don't care who has an interest there.
I care.
My problem is I want to see the prices coming down
They won't.
for the common mwananchi, and there is a way it can be done. I mean, if I was to advise on the policy that will be coming to Parliament or to Senate, you have to look at how do you allocate you are going to allow importation of maize. You need to see how you are going to allow, who you are going to allow, and how you are going to give these certificates to allow them to import. Go to the basic, how is this country? Okay. Just a minute. Right. Look at the country. We are a system of administration. Go to the counties and say, okay, this county needs this volume of food commodity. Allow the private sector to bring in for that particular county. I'll need to pause because I need a professor to come in. And two things I want you to address is, one, what he's saying, and secondly, the leadership that, Moses Kajwang has said that NASA has those plans that they have to do.
First of all, I didn't say that there is no crisis. I said that the crisis that we have is a leadership crisis. I didn't say there is no crisis. And
it's not a food crisis.
And from that leadership crisis, we have other things being called crises, okay? And food is one of them. Having said that, two things, Michael: politics and economics, okay? Mr. Kajwang is holding fort for NASA and wants to claim that NASA has solutions to problems that it and the political class over the last 54 years have created. I agree with Kajwang. In fact, the people of Kenya over the last 54 years send home 80% of the legislators in every election. But Michael, what Kajwang forgets is that this country is not governed by the 80% that go home. This country is governed by the 20% that never change. It is a country of dynasties. And we find ourselves now, again, in the same dynasties of 1963, represented by a Kenyatta and an Odinga, which he holds, one of which he holds brief for, okay? And therefore, he will come here and try to convince us that his part of the dynasty is not part of the problem in this country. It is part of the problem in this country, and Kajwang knows that it is part of the problem in this country. No amount of English, no amount of legislature, no amount of policies, Michael, will solve the leadership crisis in this country. We are held hostage by a dynasty that is taking us nowhere. That is number one. Number two, who are the people who are greatly invested in the economy in this country? He is saying, let us solve this problem by asking the private sector to import food. Michael, who is the private sector in this country? The 20% that has ruled us for the last 54 years are the private sector. So that when you say we need to import maize of 2 billion shillings, can the private sector put in bids? Who is going to put in the bids? The same people who lead NASA, the same people who lead Jubilee, the same thieves who have been stealing from us for the last 54 years are the ones who are going to put in the tenders. Number three, the issue of economy. That 20% that Kajwang is defending here in NASA and Jubilee have changed the economics of this country fundamentally. I will explain. When I was in school, I was taught that the factors of production are capital, land and labor, okay? In this country, the 20% that Kajwang is defending owns the capital, owns the land, and exploits the labor. But they have also defined economics in another way. They have added a fourth factor of production. In international economics, there are three factors of production: land, labor, and capital. In Kenya, there are four factors of production: land, labor, capital, and corruption. Corruption, Michael, has become a factor of production in this country. So that when you are talking about a crisis, you are not talking about a crisis of land, you're not talking about a crisis of capital, you're not talking about a crisis of labor, you're talking about a crisis of the fourth factor of production, which is corruption.
Let me pause you, Professor, and just give Moses Kajwang a chance, first of all, to revert to that, because Kajwang, according to Prof, he says that there's no difference between Jubilee and NASA, given that they've been in leadership for the last 54 years. He's talked about dynasties. What difference is NASA bringing on board that they have not done so far?
Mike, there's some simplistic thinking here, that if you took the Odingas and Kenyattas out of Kenya, will all of a sudden solve the problems of Kenya.
50% of the problem will be solved.
Yes, the
70%
dynasties they're
will
talking
be
about.
solved.
I can tell you that is a wrong prescription.
Of course,
And
you
that
hold,
is a
you
wrong-
hold forth for him.
Let me finish, Professor.
Yes, you are
That is a
appointed
wrong
by Odinga.
prescription.
Absolutely.
And I'm not surprised. I am
allow
not
Moses
surprised
Kejwan
it
to
is
speak.
coming from Professor who is a presidential
Yes,
candidate.
I am a presidential
And
candidate.
I think for
to
him,
remove
Professor,
the dynasties.
Professor, don't be a
please,
heckler.
you know, if we all speak, we cannot be had. Moses
Yeah.
Kejwan, please
So
go right ahead.
it is a very simplistic prescription to a much more
Unrealistic and
complex
truthful.
problem. We are talking agriculture. And I've said
leadership.
the Maputo Accord says 10% of a country's budget should go into agriculture. Ask yourself, in the last presidential address to the National Assembly and to Senate, how many times was agriculture mentioned? It was not more than once. The president and the current government does not put premium on agriculture. So it is not about changing leadership.
It
is
is.
about
It is.
focus. It is about focusing on the right things. And we can focus on the right things by defining our priorities.
By
I
changing
have said it
leadership.
very clearly. One, increase your investment in agriculture to 10% of your annual budget. Number two, look at issues of input. We have set up a fertilizer plant in Eldoret. But unfortunately, what this plant is doing is blending rather than getting local input. They're importing input from outside countries and blending it and distributing to Kenyan farmers. We must change that business model. I've talked about warehouse receipts. And Mike, allow me just to spend a minute on warehouse receipting system. A warehouse receipting system is a setup where when farmers harvest their produce, instead of taking it to NCPB, which we have, which is a very moribund state corporation, which we must reform, which the NASA government is committed to reforming, you allow farmers options of getting to a private setup that is certified as a warehouse receipt. Now, what a warehouse receipt does is that a farmer harvests and takes his produce there and gets a receipt. That receipt can be used as collateral. Those are things we must develop so that we commoditize agriculture in this country. Now, you can go further. I've talked about building last-mile infrastructure to farms. I've talked about the fact that agriculture is devolved. In fact, in this conversation, sometimes we talk about the national government and we talk about the dynasties that Professor is talking about, but we forget that our constitution has fully devolved agriculture. And you continue asking yourself, why do we have billions of shillings still remaining at the national government rather than it going to the county governments? We've talked about the 1 million acre farm, Galana Kulanu. How much have we produced?
All right, but Senator,
So, Mike, what I'm trying to say is this. There are solutions specific to agriculture. I don't think the issues of food security is just about corruption. Unfortunately, in Kenya, every problem, people say corruption is a cause. Yes, corruption is a cause, but we need to be much more specific. What will NASA do differently?
Nothing.
Because you've asked me that NASA has been around for the last...
I mean, if you look at the
54 years.
NASA principles, we have Kalonzo, Raila Mudavadi.
Mike, it is about one thing. It is execution. We need a government that can execute. We need a government that can
They have
plan
all been in
and a
government
government
at one
that can
time or the
execute.
other. Why is it that they were not able to execute?
let
What
me-
is it that's going to be different this time? Is it the combination that we have?
Mike, let me give you the evidence of execution. The SGR that we are implementing right now was a brainchild of the Grand Coalition government, where some of the principles of NASA were in it. The Galana Kulalu, which Jubilee
about
has failed
agro-leasing?
to execute, was a brainchild.
So a
Vision
brainchild of-
2030, which Jubilee has failed to implement, was a brainchild of the Grand Coalition government. Of course, I hear Third Way talking about corruption. Fine, there was corruption in the past government, as there is corruption in the current government. What we lack in this country, Mike, and I'm a member of the Agriculture Committee of the Senate, and I've walked around and I've seen how other countries are doing their agriculture sectoral development. We do not lack the intellectual capacity. We lack two things. One is integrity, which my colleagues have talked about, but two is execution capability.
All right. Let me hear from Mr. Awero.
I would like to respond to Kajwang. Kajwang may not appreciate the problem created by these dynasties. Because as far back as I would recall, he's an appointee of the dynasties.
Absolutely.
not a man of his known.
I think that cannot go unchallenged. I am an elected leader.
He's an elected
I am an elected leader. So
don't
don't allow falsehoods to go. I am an elected leader, my brother.
I will explain.
I'm an elected
You
leader.
know, in this country, yesterday I met someone, an aspirant in ODM, and I got very worried with what these guys are doing. It is costing an aspirant about 3 million shillings to get a nomination certificate in those parties. If you cannot be able to deal with corruption in a political party, then you form a government, you just accept garbage in, garbage out. Garbage in, garbage out. All the crises you saw, these political parties, like even ODM, you'll see them whenever IBC does elections. They are the first people to shout how IBC has been mismanaged.
But Mr. Aero, let me pause you a little bit. And the reason why I'm pausing you is because it's easy to say that NASA, Jubilee, whoever are, whatever they are, because you have an interest as Third Way Alliance to take over leadership. The question is, what are you bringing on board? What is it that you're going to do differently?
Yep.
I've said
It's easy to criticize the government. It's easy to criticize NASA.
It is. But let me tell you, we should not run away from the management problem. People look at politics as if politics is not management.
So what is it that Third Way Alliance is going to do that is going to be different from NASA or Jubilee?
Is first of all to cure the problems that are aiding us. One, end corruption. Two,
how? Jubilee has been on record time and again saying that they're going to get rid of corruption. That has not got rid of corruption.
They would not do it.
Third Way Alliance is not going to tell us they're going to get rid of corruption. And we believe that they're going to get rid of corruption.
No,
listen,
and we have to explain these things. Because whenever that question is asked, people expect answers that are out of the blues. The problem of corruption is a leadership problem. We are throwing the problem to the citizens. Elect clean leaders who have not been involved in the government.
The residents have done 80% turnover of leaders.
And
but
that is what Professor.
Let me pause you a little bit. Let me just pause you and take 2 calls. Let me just take some calls. And we've got Martin George from Nairobi. Good morning. Thank you for calling. To your comments, Martin. Martin George from Nairobi, if you can hear me, to your call or comment. To your question or comment. All right, maybe we'll take Robert Ouko from Nairobi. Good morning, Robert, to your comment or question.
Yes, morning.
Yes, go right ahead.
Morning, Michael.
Good morning.
Morning, Michael, I can see from your panel that you have a presidential candidate.
Yes.
Who seem not to monitor the history. And he's speaking to us about Dynasties, CG, Dynasties, CG, what? And he has no account of the fight of revolution and everything that Raila Odinga has fought for this country. Until now, we can see the openness of Thika Superhighway and many things which the previous government could not even implement. What Raila Odinga did for this country, people are still crying that he demolished the building from Thika Road, and they are now counting for the benefit of the Thika Road. And he has tried to implement, but due to the corrupt nation, where people corrupt the property of the nation and they claim as theirs, they cannot even allow the openness of the city so that we remove the decongestion of the city. Their own interest is only to build a tall building and give a corrupt revenue from their account. We have
Mr. Ouko, I'll request that you get to the point. Just make your point, please, so that we can move the debate forward. What's your point?
I just want to correct the panelists that we are not on the dynasties talking about, but we are fighting for the leader of revolution. The leader who can bring change to common wananchi, a fighter for common wananchi, a freedom fighter for common wananchi. That is even why Raila Odinga said that he is going for only one term. When somebody says he's going for only one term, it means that he has something of interest to fight for.
Well, we've got your point, and Mr. Wawero, you are finishing on what Third Way Alliance is going to do. Then maybe I'll give a chance for Professor to respond to the dynasty question, but finish off on what Third Way Alliance is bringing on board.
No, as Third Way Alliance, we've looked at what ails this country. Once we sort out the issue of leadership, now we implement policy. Since I was in school, we have been talking policy, policy, policy. We have no shortage of policy in this country. And that is why we are saying the leadership problem has to be resolved in this country. Number two, we'll be able to enable ordinary small-scale farmers to produce own food through such technology as drip irrigation, mechanizing small-scale agriculture. We can be able to mechanize small-scale agriculture. I've never seen mechanized small-scale agriculture in Kenya. We see it in China, we see it in other countries, but in Kenya it doesn't happen. People are still using agrarian tools to do agriculture in this country, making it impossible to produce enough food for a household in this country.
Okay.
So now, on the way forward, we also have to redistribute, to go and implement even like the recommendations of the Dongo report, because even the distribution of rand is part of the problem, because some people are holding too much rand, which is idle, which is not being used. We shall tax idle rand.
Okay. Let me take a call from Martin before I come back to Prof. Martin, good morning. You're calling from Nairobi. To your comment or question, Martin?
Good morning, Mike.
Morning.
I just want to make a comment. I have many a time seen this gentleman called Professor, I don't know even his name. And this fellow, I don't know where he got his professorship from. He speaks as someone who has been to school. Let me tell you, politically in this country. Politically in this country, the trend has been one trend. And I'm sorry, I hope he's listening. When a professor, I want you to understand, in 1963, Jaramogi gave a seat to Kenyatta. And Kenyatta threw him out after 2 years. Jaramogi never ruled this country until he died. His son took over when he was a lecturer at the University of Nairobi in engineering department, Raila Odinga. Raila was fighting for space that time, which Kenyatta dynasty had created. People could not speak. Nobody ever contested against Kenyatta, and so forth. I'm very happy that today the nation has known the first corrupt deal in this country, the fertilizer project, was a Kenyatta corruption project. And this project, my friend, I wanted to know that we are still paying for it. Uhuru has never worked anywhere. You cannot spend 4 billion, 10 billion shillings to campaign for presidency, to go and earn 2 million shillings per month, which comes hardly about 200 million shillings in 5 years. My friend, we must stem and correct this country by only going to...
All right, Martin George, and let me come to you, Professor. Yeah, you seem to be rubbing people the wrong way.
I do.
And this is the reason being the fact that one cannot ignore the fight that Raila Amolo Odinga has had and Jaramogi Oginga Odinga has had for this country. So for somebody to dismiss and say that it is purely dynasty, you'll need to verify that.
Michael and the good caller.
Martin and Robert.
Martin and Robert, the good caller, okay? History is a good place to visit, but it is not a good place to live. And therefore, when I come here to say that the current political class is steeped and driven by ethnicity, impunity, and mediocrity, siasa ya ukabila, ukora, na upuzi, the current political class, that does not remove from any other issues or any other contribution that has been done. Michael, I will remind you that they are holding pitch for the Odinga dynasty, that the Odinga dynasty was, he said it was freedom fighters or something like that. We can hold the same position about the Kenyatta dynasty and say that Kenyatta was a freedom fighter and say that Kenyatta was the father of the nation. We can make that argument. So that if that argument is being made for the Odinga dynasty, the same argument can be made for the Kenyatta dynasty. And we need to look at history, but we need to look at history with our eyes focused on the present and the future. What is the current problem now? The Kenyatta dynasty, which was a freedom fighting, which originated as a freedom fighting dynasty. The Odinga dynasty, which originated as a freedom fighting dynasty, what have they mutated into? They have mutated into tribal, corrupt, and mediocre dynasties. And what a new generation. This guy says he was 4 years in 1975. I was probably even younger than that. What a new generation of the Kajwangs and the Wainainas and the Gitongas needs to do is to ask ourselves, going forward, are these dynasties which have a history of freedom fighting, are they building the kind of nation that we want our children to live in? If the answer to that question is no, it is therefore my responsibility and your responsibility to ask ourselves, what is our vision going forward, inspired by the successes of the past and advised by the failures of the past, because we have successes and we have failures. So I do not hold fort here for Kenyatta dynasty, for Odinga dynasty. I hold fort here for the people of Kenya going forward. We need to ask ourselves, how far have we come? What have been the successes? What have been the failures? How do we go ahead? And one way, Michael, of going ahead is changing the 54-year kakistocracy in NASA and Jubilee. Michael, like he has said, this country has no shortage of policies.
Okay.
But for so long as the country is held hostage by thieves and tribal kingpins, we will not make progress.
All right, and well, time is showing us our back, and we're not yet done, but those of us on the home channel will need to move on to Life and Style, which is about to begin right now. But those of us on KTN News will stay on with this debate and have our closing comments coming up not too long from now. So those of us on KTN Home will say goodbye. Life and Style begins. Those of us who'd like to continue with this debate, if you're on the home channel, move over to KTN News as we continue and have our closing comments. So KTN Home, goodbye. All right, and let me come to you, Mr. Obiro, and you've heard what your colleagues have had to say. And we want to now go as we wind up. Evidently, as far as they're concerned, we have an issue with leadership. It is, as much as we may say there's production issues, as much as we say maybe we're not using the right agricultural tools to be where we are today, it rises and falls in leadership. Do you agree?
I'll say it this way. One, the issue we are having is a mindset issue. It's not about, because if I listen to the conversation and we bring in the people who have the same mindset, we are going to have a challenge. The challenge,
even if we change the leadership.
Even if you change the person and the mindset is the same, you end up in the same mess. And what is the problem that we are having? People outside there are buying foodstuffs at very high prices. You heard recently that cost of living is being pushed to the employers, that they have to increase the salaries so that they can take care of the cost of living. There is a problem. We need the immediate solutions to ensure, first, we have the situation under control where the prices are comfortable for the common citizens. And this is what I'm saying. We need to look at how do we import in the commodities that we don't have. Let's allow that importation. Then let's control the distribution to ensure that it is distributed to the areas that we need. And then if we do that, we are going to have this problem being arrested. Then in the long run, as we move, we need a country to be rallied behind just one mindset, productivity. And by this, what I mean is, if we invest, what I need to see in Parliament is what we invest in agriculture. For every shilling we are putting in agriculture, how much are we getting from there? What is the production? If we go to the Galana project, is how much have we put there and how much have we gotten? I want to see the members of Parliament interrogating and saying, okay, if the Minister for Finance comes, like the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Treasury recently came, and he's giving the budget and they are interrogating. The technical team can do the nitty-gritties down, the figures and all that. But I want them to come up and say, in this budget, how many millions of bags of maize are we going to produce? And then when we come to the next budget, they'll be able to ask the hard question. We gave and allowed these billions of money to be spent on agriculture. How much of the produce did we get? And that should go into everything. Okay. And we make it a country, just to close.
I need to wind up, but yes. Maybe just to point out that we already have a grain reserves that are supposed to serve this country for at least 2 years without any problem. So the question, of course, would be what has been happening? What has happened to the grain reserves? Why aren't those grain reserves being used? Secondly, a recent report that was out showed that for the last 8 years, there has been grain in the grain reserves that has not been used, which makes it even poisonous. It cannot be used anymore. So really...
That's why I touched on the problem, say the problem of distribution. And we need to see if we have the money.
So when we have maize locked up somewhere, the issue is distribution.
Yes,
who's in charge of that maize?
Release it. Whoever, I mean, the policy should be, this maize should be able to be released to the people who will distribute it to the common mwananchi. Okay. And even if Professor is trashing the private sector is the best suited to do that. You release it to the private sector, and it can be, as a government, you have a policy, say, our lowest unit in terms of administration, we have our assistant chiefs in places. From there, you start releasing it at that point to the private sector. You distribute it to the private sector. The small traders who are in that area, they can go and buy from it and distribute. They will not have this problem that we have.
I'll have to pause you.
As last, my bottom line point is, we need a mindset in Kenya, a mindset change that will rally the nation at any level on productivity improvement. All right. The nations that have made it, that's what they did.
So in short, we need a paradigm shift.
Yes.
Let me come to you, Senator Moses Kajwang, as we close. Should NASA take over the reins of this country on August the 8th as the next government, what solutions what promise are you giving to Kenyans in regards to the cost of living right now?
First of all, it's unfortunate that this debate, which is supposed to be on food and agriculture, has degenerated into an Odinga Kenyatta kind of debate, which is the problem of Kenya, that every time you want to address a particular issue, people take you back to personalities and political personalities. This was an opportunity.
Because that's what the problem is.
This was an opportunity. They're already heckling. This was an opportunity for us to address issues of the agricultural sector. Many people don't know that there's been a restructuring of the agricultural sector, where before we had more than 10 parastatals in the agriculture sector. Now we have one parastatal called AFA, Agriculture, Food and Fisheries Authority. And this is a time for us to question, is it effective? And should we be investing more into AFA so that we give agriculture, which is a backbone of our economy, which is the largest employer in this economy, we give it the impetus that is required, first of all, for people to get employment and for there to be food security. The question is it possible for government to intervene on food prices? And my answer is yes. Unfortunately, the prescription that Jubilee has given is very myopic. Jubilee is saying, let us import feed from Brazil or wherever, whatever other countries. For me, that is a very short-term solution. Because the problem in Kenya, for me, is not about production per se. Yes, we've got production challenges. But if you looked at the papers yesterday, you'd find that rice farmers in Ahero are struggling with market for their rice. You will find that even maize farmers in the North Rift, every time they harvest, they've got a problem on market access for their produce. So it is not about importing maize or importing rice from foreign countries. It is not about waiving duty. In fact, when you waive duty and you bring about opportunities for import, that is what Professor and the rest of the people are talking about, that there are people who take advantage of those things. It does not have to be politicians. It could be politically connected business people who have got ships waiting just for the waiver. And in fact, Mike, right now, there is, in the industry, there is a feeling or there is some sense of apprehension that the government is going to allow duty-free import of sugar. And you will not be surprised that the minute that that announcement is made, duty-free sugar will be landing in Kenya. So it is possible for the government to intervene on high food prices. But the intervention needs to be, wide. It cannot be short-termism that we are doing. And that's why I keep saying, let us invest more in agriculture. The Maputo Accord is a good template that we can look at as a nation and ask ourselves, if we put 10% of our investment in agriculture, what then would be the output? Let us invest in last mile infrastructure. Let us implement a warehouse receipting system in this country. Let us give effect to Article 43 of the Kenyan Constitution on food security. Let us look at the supply chain issues, because between production, the reason why the farmer sells his maize at 80 shillings on the day of harvest, and when there's food shortage, he has to buy it at 200 shillings, is about supply chain issues. Those are the things we need to address, and those are the things that NASA is committed to doing. And I can tell you that the difference is simple. The difference is just the spirit and the conviction and the courage to execute. This country is not lacking in policy.
Mr. Wawero,
it is lacking in people who can execute.
All right.
Mwanagitonga,
and I need them to be brief.
The senator is not telling us the truth. You know, in the current setup of Kenya, CORD is actually, or NASA is not an opposition party. They run government. They have been running 24 counties. And agriculture is devolved. They are not talking of what they achieved in the last 4 years, implementing agricultural policies in the counties. This is a group of people who are either deluded or they don't understand their mandate. The agriculture is 100% devolved. According to the senator and according to our constitution, he is right. What has NASA done with that? If we give them further mandate, we will give them mandates to go on destroying. If you go, I'm an accountant by profession. If you go through audit reports from all NASA counties, the same as Jubilee counties, is hell. Money has been lost. And these guys, they were there, they gave even direct nominations to some of their governors who are accused of losing a lot of money. They are not protecting public interest. Why we are going back, we know about all the policies or agricultural policies. You're going to see our manifesto soon in third way. We may not leak some of the information here. It's not that we are clueless. We want, first of all, we cannot give them our ideas. What we need is, we have seen these people. Kalonzo became an MP in 1985. I was a Form 2 student. I was a child. He still now, he has been sitting in cabinet for almost 30 years. Odinga has been in cabinet from 1998 to date.
That still doesn't give us a solution from the alliance. That's what
just,
they've been doing, and that's
just hold on. Just hold on. We are saying that is why we have come out to look for
alternatives
to replace leadership, because that is where squarely the problem is. Now, the next solution from Third Way Alliance is we must work. The national government will work in cooperation with the county governments. What we are seeing now, even with the national government, is competition between the two levels of government in fighting instead of cooperation. Because the national government is in charge of policy, like in agriculture. The county governments are in charge of implementation of policy, production. And that is why I'm asking the senator, what have you guys done in the 24 counties you have been running for the last 4 years?
All right, Professor Michael Wainaina, your closing comments.
That would be a very good place to end it, and for Kajwang to tell us all those policies and all those good ideas. Have they implemented even one of them as a showcase to tell us that once they get into central government, this is what they will scale up? I like what the gentleman said. And this is why I'm running for president. He said, we need a paradigm shift. We need to start thinking differently. Michael, societies do not change because dynasties start thinking differently. Societies change because a young, new generation comes into leadership with new ideas. And why I am running for president is to make sure that we lay the foundation for a new, youthful generation to bring new ideas for the paradigm shift that he is talking about. Kajwang is telling us that we are going to get new ideas from the same dynasties which have ended us here. Michael, they say you cannot solve a problem using the same knowledge and the same consciousness that created it. You need a higher consciousness to solve that problem. We need a new, youthful generation to get into power and to bring new ideas in order for the paradigm shift to happen. If we don't do that, we are in trouble, and this country will not make progress.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I think we'll have to wind it up right there because of time. Honorable Senator Moses Kajwang, Senator for Homa Bay, thank you for joining us. We also have Muiruri Waweru, who's the chair for Third Way Alliance. We have Professor Michael Wainaina, who's an independent presidential candidate. And last but not least, we have Stephen Obiro, who's the manager in research and policy on advocacy. Thank you very much for joining us. And that's the state of the nation. We'll take a break. We'll be back with some news headlines, and do stay with us. We've got some news stories coming up right here on Morning Express.